Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This week's video is going to look a lot different from my usual content, as we are going to actually be talking about handheld light tactics for the private citizen. Now, this is a topic where I feel like I know enough to make my own personal decisions on lights and their uses, but this is not an area where I feel that I'm qualified to actually go into your specific use case as a private citizen and kind of scenarios in which you would find it advantageous to use a handheld light. So I asked my good friend John Johnston from Citizens Defense Research, as well as the host of Ballistic Radio, to come on to today's video and talk to you guys about handheld lights, their applications for private citizens, and I'm going to ask him a series of questions that I think are going to be really helpful for you guys going forward in making choices about what lights to carry and why it's important to carry a handheld light. So John, you influenced my initial handheld light purchases, and I know why I value your opinion, especially on this particular topic, but can you share briefly some of your professional experience with handheld lights and their applications?
I think the one that everyone kind of knows me for is I was an outside consultant for product development at Surefire and was part of the team that did a lot of cool things, very small part of the team. But the reason I got that job was because I have been to a lot of places and talked to a lot of people about low light theory and how that should be applied, how that should work in a bunch of different contexts. So instead of being sort of trapped into, well, this is what I came up doing, and this is my very strong opinion about whatever, I've gotten to listen to a lot of very intelligent people talk about how light should be used, see where agreements occur, see where disagreements occur, and then try and understand how context might change the use of something like that.
Mhm.
So if that makes sense, I've done a lot of low light stuff with a lot of very intelligent people and very smart people. And honestly, I've been very lucky to be able to sort of collect all of that and, um, form my own opinions and pass those along where appropriate. But as far as I am not like the low light guy. If I had to pick, uh, the person that I would go and defer to if they disagreed with me, it'd be someone like Chuck Haggard or Chase Jenkins. One of those two immediately spring to mind, and there are others too. So I know some stuff. I don't know everything, but I've been looking at it for a little while.
So what's the difference between a task light and a tactical or a defensive light?
So if you could use your cell phone to do it, then it's a task light sort of job, right? And fighting lights are going to be primarily depending on your context, right? So what I want a fighting and light for might be a little bit different than what someone in you know SWAT might want to light for, might be a little bit different than what someone who primarily works in the great outdoors, with no ambient illumination around. There can be different things, but primarily, when I think of a fighting light, the important part is that when you use it, you get all of the light right now, and there's not a bunch of switching through modes, um, fighting odd switchology, things like that, right? And that's kind of the difference, is that with a task light you can have multiple different modes, and it doesn't really matter that much if you hit the wrong one, because your keys aren't going to kill you from under the restaurant table or something like that. But if you have a fighting light and you really need it right now for whatever scenario you can envision, and you press the button, and instead of getting all the light, you get the lowest power setting, or you get some sort of weird strobe that, you know, turns into a siren and dances, or, you know, things like that. And to be clear, I'm not making a comment on the usefulness of a strobe feature, because there are certainly techniques that you can use those for, but primarily for me, what I'm looking for is I press the button, I get all of the light where I want it to be right now. And then there's also some technical differences as far as how the light is output. And, you know, do you have like a wide diffused pattern to your beam that's really good for kind of letting you see most of everything in your immediate vicinity, but it's not going to go too far. So something like a, you know, think of it like a floodlight, right? Again, like your cell phone's a really good example of that. The beam quality on that, remove output from it. There's not a hot spot, you know, it's just very diffuse. Versus something like a fighting light, I am a giant fan of a very distinct hotspot. Again, for my context, I'm not doing a bunch of searching, you know, for that kind of thing. If I've gotten a light out and I'm using it the way that we're talking about, chances are I've already oriented on the thing that I want to light up. And really what I want to do is just get as much of that light, preferably into someone's eyes, as I can right now. And that's not to say that there might not, you know, I can think of a couple of different scenarios where I might be using a light to look for something in a potential self-defense situation, but primarily I have a strong suspicion that I would already kind of know where the thing was that I wanted to put a light on, most of the time.
Would you be comfortable sharing any examples of scenarios where you would use a fighting light like that?
Sure. Because I've done it before. Somebody's sketchy in a Walmart parking lot, and it's clear that they are approaching me for whatever reason, and, you know, get a light out and just, hey, can you stay right there? You know, something like that. And, you know, you can have a conversation with a person in that scenario and be controlling, to some degree, what they're able to see. You're also not behaving as typical, which, you know, if it is a violent criminal actor trying to select you for violence, you know, might deselect you. If it's a regular person that, you know, is not going to be a problem, had no intention of being a problem, yeah, okay, you were weird, but I'm already weird every day of my life, so that doesn't really bother me that much, you know.
Yeah.
And you're laughing because you know how true that is. But yeah, so that would be, I think, a very typical use case for the kind of handheld lights that I am talking about. Again, for a private citizen. And I do want to be really clear. I'm not speaking to a law enforcement context. I'm not speaking to a military context. Specifically, I'm not speaking to a home defense context, because I have a lot of thoughts on that. You know, but as far as using a light as a defensive tool, which is primarily what I'm interested in, that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Can you also touch on the topic of Candela and lumens?
We can talk about that. Candela tells you more about what the light will actually do for you, in my opinion, than lumens do, right? And the best example that I have is, you know, if we look at something like the mod light, the OKW, compared to the PLH V2 or whatever. The PLH has more lumens, significantly more lumens. The OKW has more Candela. What does that equate to? Going back to the thing that I was talking about as far as what I want a fighting light for versus a task light, I want to be able to essentially control as much of the vision of whomever I am utilizing that light against as possible. I also want to be able to put light into their eyes in the widest range of lighting conditions. You know, so even if I'm indoors and I'm just like an office light, if you have a light that has enough candela, it's going to be a lot more impactful to that person than a light with a lot of lumens but no candela. And the easiest way to think about it would be if you're a car person, right? Horsepower at the engine is not horsepower at the wheels. Some of it's lost in translation. Lumens, the way I think of it, and I'm sure someone will hop into the comments and say that I am oversimplifying, and yes. But the way I think of lumens is horsepower at the engines, right? And if you have enough lumens, that can carry over, right? But your reflector design comes into play and all sorts of stuff. And, if you have a reflector design that's not really intended to focus any of that, you can have a ton of lumens and very, very little candela. Candela would be horsepower at the wheels, with the wheels representing like some, our aggressors, retinas, however you want to think of it, right? And again, massive oversimplification, but generally, the more candela, the more light is actually going to reach something at further distances and still be cohesive and focused. It's an ugly analogy, but it's probably better than getting into, distances and, how many per square meter and blah, blah, blah. But again, depends what you want. And it depends how much of, how you're framing the use of a light. If a light is for you primarily to search for and identify stuff, you might not want as much candela. You might have a personal preference based off of where you live, stuff like there's all sorts of reasons that you would select one over the other. I think the thing that to keep in mind is that lumens doesn't tell all of the story. Candela doesn't either, and if you understand, at least, in a general sense, what you're looking for and what you're wanting to use light for, you can probably make a more informed decision.
Okay, so with that in mind, is there a minimum amount of candela or a minimum amount of lumens that we would want to require in a light for that purpose?
Again, we sort of get into the making an absolute statement about minimums, right? Is as well as I do that I don't like doing things like that because so much of it depends on what you're wanting to use a light for, and the other thing to keep in mind is that there was a lot of work that got done with 60 lumen halogen surefires, and if we looked at those today, I think no one would carry one of those on purpose, right? But they did pretty okay at the time. And the technology is going to constantly be changing. So I could make a definitive statement like, you need this much or you're going to be killed in the streets. I mean, that's just not true.
Yeah.
I prefer, as much candela as I can get, while still providing enough, spill, so surrounding light outside of the hotspot, to use it to look for stuff if I need to. What's the magic number there? I don't know. Um, you know, again, I'm a pretty big fan currently of the OKW from Mod Light, and it's right around like 69,000 lumens. Or excuse me, Candela, and like 700-ish, maybe 580, somewhere in there.
You're like spot on.
Yeah, lumens. That's what I'm using right now. I know Surefire is getting ready to release, turbo versions of their EDC lights, which I'm super curious about because I worked on the original ones,
Mm.
and liked them quite a bit. And they're saying they're going to be 71,000 Candela, and
Wow.
I think 580
Hmm.
lumens. Will you be able to tell a difference between the new Surefire, the Mod Light? Yeah, I'm sure. Will it actually matter? I don't know.
Hmm.
I haven't played with the new Surefire yet, but you know, we get so wrapped up in chasing like the latest and the greatest. And before anyone worried about, do I have enough Candela? Um, I'd go train with Craig Douglas or, Chuck Haggard and learn about incorporating a light into your managing unknown contacts game. If you're hearing about managing unknown contacts for the first time, like watching this video, and you're super worried about how much Candela your light has, I'd probably argue that there are other things that are a little bit more important to be concerned about, rather than chasing gear. And that's the thing, everyone chases gear because it's a lot easier to pull your credit card out, buy something, and oh, I'm good now. It's like, no, no. Because I could give one of my kids my Mod Light, and they're not going to know how to use it inside of the context that we're talking about.
Hmm.
And when most people start arguing about this sort of things, I really do wonder, like, hey, how much time have you spent actually working on this stuff? Or did you just find someone on the internet whose video you liked and now you're parroting their talking points with no understanding of how they arrived there? That's kind of one of the problems, though, is that I think these conversations are great, but hopefully what these conversations accomplish is getting people to understand that, yes, the gear kind of matters a little bit, but the concepts behind it are really what's important.
When it comes to defensive tools like handguns or pepper spray or knives, we generally want to be able to access them quickly. So is prioritizing quick access also really important for a handheld light?
No, it's not important at all. And here's why I say that. It's not important at all if you are thinking about where it's most likely for you to be using something like that, and you just stage it in your hand ahead of time. So I want you to think about like the number of times, you've even been to dinner with me. Like if we've been at like a training event or whatever, and we've gone out to dinner afterwards, how many times have I had my light already in my hand?
Oh, I couldn't give you a number, but yeah.
Every single time. But
Mm.
that's the thing. Did you notice?
No.
Okay. Neither did anyone else. And
Hmm.
that's the beauty of something like a light or even pepper spray, is that you can stage something like that in your hand. It's like, oh, I'm going to enter a parking lot, get my light, get my pepper spray. My hands are large enough that I can palm a pepper spray and no one will ever know it's there. And so for me, I don't put a ton of emphasis on being able to quickly access stuff like that, because it's not like I'm not going to know where I'm most likely to need it or use it. And
Mm.
if I'm already somewhere and a situation starts developing, well, okay, I get it in my hand, but I'm not going to quick draw a light or a pepper spray. If I need to access something like that quickly, I have a strong suspicion that those aren't the things that I need to get out real fast right now.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, if I have them in a pocket or in my waistband somewhere that I can get to it without you know being super obvious about it, that's good enough for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, I've got I actually brought my mod light for the video just to show. I've got a hair tie around the theorem clip, and I'll actually bury this in my pocket with the hair tie, sticking up so that I can reach in and fish it out. I do that with my pepper spray too. And again, primarily that's just, not for quick access, just to be able to get to it if it's not oriented correctly, and still know, well, once I have this, I've got the rest of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some people might disagree with me, and maybe there's something I haven't considered, but for my use case where it doesn't cost me anything to just stage both those things ahead of time, and I know I'm going to need, like, if I'm going to use it in public, it's going to happen in a transitional space 9 times out of 10. Well, okay, I'll just have them on my hand already. And that's kind of why they're cool, is because there's not really um, a negative outcome attached to having a flashlight in your hand or having pepper spray in your hand. They're actually pretty socially acceptable,
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, almost everywhere you go.
Mm-hmm.
So like even people that are really anti-gun, anti-self-defense, um, generally don't have a problem with pepper spray, which is an interesting thing. And so yeah, that's how I do it.
So, to learn more about managing unknown contacts, who should we go to or where should we go to receive training like that?
Chuck Haggard would be my absolute first choice. Agile training and consulting. A lot of my thoughts on what we're talking about were directly and strongly influenced by Chuck. So if you like anything that I'm saying, I would just go get it from the source, as far as, and the source is not that, I don't think any of this is original to me at all. I would be shocked if it was. So I'd go and train with Chuck. Can go, if you're just wanting managing unknown contacts, going and training with Craig is a great idea. If you're wanting to work this sort of thing more in the context of like home defense or something like that, the first thing I'll say is that your home, you get to control the lighting. And I personally just have lights strategically placed so that the things I want lit up are lit up, and the places I am likely to be are not. But let's say for whatever reason you don't want to, cheat and set your lights up for success ahead of time, and you want to learn how to move through a structure with a light. Craig Douglas's arm movement and structures class is great. Um, going and training with the guys at Centrifuge, so Will Petty, Chase Jenkins, all those guys, Dan Smith, um, highly recommend them. And that's not to say there aren't other people doing cool stuff in low light. That's just off the top of my head, the people that are still living that I have trained with, um, you know, my suggestion.
Is there anything else that you would like to add on for the topic of lights?
Sure. Um, Weapon mounted lights on concealed carry guns. If you want to do that, that's fine. And I can think of a couple of different reasons to do that. The only thing that I will say is they are not mandatory on a concealed carry gun. And the only reason I bring that up is the number of people I have met who think that it is mandatory on a concealed carry gun and then can't figure out how to conceal a gun with a weapon mounted light on it and then stop carrying, kind of problematic. And again, for me, knowing how to use one, nice to have, but take it or leave it in public. On a home defense gun, is a weapon mounted light a great idea? It is, as long as you know how to use one. And the funny thing, I would argue, even if I have a weapon mounted light, I'm still using a handheld light to search with, because I don't like pointing a muzzle at things that I don't know what's there. And I know someone's going to say, well, you can use the ceiling or the floor to, yeah, I know. I'm aware. Again, there's some human performance stuff that I have personally seen happen that, I'll say this: everyone knows that you can't just buy a gun and know how to use it. Like that, it doesn't work that way. You need to, you need to train with it. You need to understand some of the potential negative outcomes attached to it, blah, 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 blah. The number of people that know that about a gun and then completely ignore it about a weapon mounted light is very curious to me. And well, it's just a flashlight. On its own, yes, it's just a flashlight. As soon as you put it on a gun, it's a gun that happens to have a flashlight on it. And there are some things that you can do with that that aren't immediately obvious that turn into a bad day real quick. So that's all I've got to say about that.
I'm really glad you added the weapon mounted light conversation into this video.
Yeah. And again, like, I'm not even getting into the likelihood, what's typical, what's not, because frankly, I don't think that's important. The only thing I'll say is, I am not personally aware of any instance in public, very specific, in public, where the lack of a weapon mounted light on a private citizen's gun affected the outcome. Not saying it's never happened, just saying I'm not aware of it. And as far as the number of shootings that I am familiar with that have involved a weapon mounted light on a gun, let's not even get into whether or not it was activated. Again, for a private citizen, I'm aware of one. And, that was in a rural setting. So if you live in a rural setting and, you're carrying a gun for all of the great reasons you might be carrying a gun, yeah, maybe you might prioritize a weapon mounted light. If you live in the middle of Alaska, and there's nothing else around, and yeah, cool. But don't let it be the difference between caring or not caring. And please don't assume that just because you bought the thing, that you know everything there is to know about how to use one safely and effectively.
Well, and because you haven't mentioned it yet, I'll mention it. You have an amazing ballistic radio episode on weapon mounted lights with Chuck Haggard. So if anybody has any questions about that or wants to learn more about it, I'm going to link that down in the description. It's an awesome episode.
Yeah, well, thank you. And the funny thing about that, and I know it's going to happen here too, I'm not telling anyone not to do it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying they're not capital, like underlined, bold, necessary.
John, do you carry weapon mounted light?
Sometimes, depends. Yeah. If honestly, the scenario that I am most likely to have a weapon mounted light on my gun is if I'm going to the movies. That's the number one scenario. Or if for whatever reason my carry gun happens to be my home defense handgun and I don't want to switch back and forth, because administratively, that's the other thing too. If you're putting the weapon mounted light on your carry gun when you get home, that's cool. Are you unloading your gun each time you do that? You should be. It'll be okay. Yeah, it'll be okay until it's not. So like I'm trying to minimize unnecessary administrative handling of loaded guns. And then like, all right, you're gonna unload it every time. Are you rotating your carry rounds out? Because they only like to get chambered so many times before they do bad things. So again, like everyone's math is going to be different. And like, hey, do whatever, just know why you're doing it, if that makes sense.
John, thanks for coming on to the channel today to just kind of finish things out. Where can we find John Johnston?
Oh, I do teach with all of the amazing people at Citizens Defense Research, and we're doing a bunch of cool things. And our new website actually should be live, if not by the time this is posted, very, very soon. But that's going to have all of our training classes and all of that on there. Or I guess if you want to check out Ballistic Radio, you can do that. Where if you Google search for Ballistic Radio, it'll come up, and you can search in whatever your preferred podcasting app is, and it's probably there. Or I'm sure you'll tag me on Instagram, and people can watch me not post very much, which is like a really big shift for me. But so yeah, but I'm around, and way smarter people than me are around. And if you reach out and talk with me, if I can answer your question, I will. I'm happy to help. And if I can't, I can certainly point you to someone who's got a better answer than I do.
Well, thanks again for coming onto the channel and chatting with us today.
Always great talking with you.
Hey guys, you can find the vast majority of the resources that John shared and talked about in today's video down in the description box below. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, we really appreciate it. And I would appreciate if you went down in the comment section below and let me know maybe some of the things that you learned from this video. And stay tuned for next week's video, where I'm going to do a pretty in-depth review on some of the handheld lights that we talked about in this week's video, as well as the lights that I talked about in my everyday carry video a couple of weeks back. Thanks again for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.